Hi, my name is Nicoara. I'm a PhD student at the University of Southern California, and I'll be talking about gender essences without membership. So let's get started. And first, let's start by explaining the notion of essence that I will be using in this talk. So as metaphysicians of gender, one of the things that we're trying to do is to give metaphysical accounts of gender kinds, such as women, men, non-binary, and so on. So what do I mean by a metaphysical account of a gender kind such as woman? Well, what we're looking for is to specify what the most important features of this kind are. So for example, what kind of thing is it? Is it abstract or concrete? What is it grounded in exactly? What are its existence and persistence conditions? Should we be pluralists about gender kinds or the gender kinds that are in the vicinity of women, or is there a single kind woman, and so on. And this project of giving a metaphysical account of women in turn can be thought of as an attempt to specify the essential properties of women. So what are essences more specifically, or what are essential properties? And in fact, although this project is quite new, a number of philosophers have already written about it. So for instance, Asia Pasinski defines the Essentialist project as a project that aims to give real definitions of the various objects that are of interest to metaphysics. And following Kit Fine, a real definition is a definition of the things themselves, as opposed to a definition of our words or concepts for them. Rebecca Mason defines an essence as some property or properties which comprise the identity of a kind K. That is, some properties which constitute what it is to be K. In general, I like to think of the essence of some X as the property or properties that X could not possibly lack, or that X necessarily has in virtue of what it is. And I've got a pretty long list of examples that I won't be reading out, but I think that the notion is quite intuitive. Importantly, as many, starting with Kit Fine, have repeatedly emphasized, essence is not merely a modal notion. So the essential properties of some X are properties that it necessarily has, but they're not just any necessary properties. So standard example, being such that 2 + 2 = 4 is a necessary property of Socrates, but it's not an essential property of Socrates. So essential properties are properties that are necessarily possessed by something in virtue of that thing's being what it is, or in virtue of the nature of that thing. So this is why, as metaphysicians of gender, we are in the business of trying to specify the essential properties of gender kinds, because we're trying to explain what those kinds are. Okay, so what is the relationship between essence and membership? As we all know, gender kinds have members. So the kind woman has individual women as its members. Now, there is a very widespread assumption in the literature and among non-philosophers as well. And I call this view the received view. And on the received view, part of the essence of gender kinds are its membership conditions. So by membership conditions, I mean the property or properties possession of which qualifies an individual as a member of the kind. So I take it to be pretty uncontroversial that one membership condition for woman, for the kind woman, is sincerely self-identifying as a woman. So on the received view, when we define the kind woman, when we specify its essential properties, the properties that make it what it is, one thing that our definition should include should be the fact that woman is the gender kind that, among other things, it is such that sincerely self-identifying as a member of it is sufficient, although perhaps not necessary, for any individual to be a member of it. Okay, so I believe that the received view is false. I believe that membership conditions are not essential to any gender kinds. In fact, as I will argue shortly, the membership conditions of women are contingent. What this means in practice is that our best, fullest metaphysical account of a gender kind, such as women, is not going to say anything about which types of individuals count as women and in virtue of what they do so. Of course, our account of the essential properties of women should be able to explain why the kind woman has the membership conditions it does, but it's not going to mention any such membership conditions. So, okay, if we don't have membership conditions in the real definition of any gender kinds, then what do we have? And on the next slide, I actually have a substantive proposal for an essentialist account of the kind woman that makes no reference to its membership conditions. I will not be reading it out, but you are welcome to pause the talk here and give this slide a read if you want a better idea of what such a view would look like. Okay, so actually nothing in the rest of this argument will depend on any specific parts of my view. Let's get a bit more general and talk about a few possible candidates for the properties that give, for example, the kind woman its identity, for properties that are essential to it. So one feature that might be essential to this kind might be the nature or content of the social roles associated with it. So some philosophers think that it is essential to the kind woman that the social roles that are generally assigned to women are subordinate ones. We might even say that there are certain substantive social roles that are essential to womanhood, such as, being nurturing or being caring or being submissive and so on. And this is not to say that members of the kind woman necessarily or essentially instantiate these properties, but rather it's to say that the kind woman is such that it has ideally been conceived as the kind that is partly constituted by such social roles. Another property or set of properties that might be essential to the kind woman might be its historical origin or descent. So in my own account, for example, I argue that what gives woman its identity, what makes it what it is the fact that it descends in the right way from the earliest possible structure in which social roles of a certain kind were assigned to individuals who were perceived to be female. Which brings us to yet another possible essential property of women, which is it might be essential to women that it has a very tight historical, if nothing else, connection to the allegedly natural sex category female. And this, again, is not to say that members of the kind woman necessarily have to be female, but it is to say that the way in which this kind has developed and the practices that still sustain its existence these days bear a strong connection with what is taken to be a natural kind, namely female. And it's kind of tricky to spell out exactly what the strong connection is, but I think most of us would agree that there is something there. Okay, so I hope I've given you an idea of what an account of the essence of women that doesn't specify any membership criteria would look like. So the rest of this talk will be dedicated to showing why we should go for this kind of essentialist account. And I will look at 4 advantages of this approach. Okay, let's start with the first advantage. So if the membership conditions of women are not essential to it, then it follows that they are contingent. And this, I think, is exactly the right prediction. So here on the slide, I have 2 examples, and the basic idea behind both of these examples is that in both cases, we have 2 gender kinds that are extremely similar to our gender kind woman, or at least the gender kind that most of us are likely to think of when we hear woman as speakers in the 21st century in the Western world. However, I'm assuming here that sincere self-identification is a membership condition for our gender kind woman. But in both of these cases, the people belonging to the kinds that are similar to women don't actually meet this condition of sincere self-identification. So it would take too long to read out these examples. So for this reason, I will ask you to please pause the recording here and take some time to read the examples, either from the slide itself or from my handout that's attached. Okay, so now 2 questions arise. The first question is the kind woman as we currently have it the same kind as the kind our woman? So is it just our woman that has survived through time? And the second question is the kind Z woman the same kind as our kind woman? Now remember that on the received view, membership conditions are essential, and the essential properties of a kind determine its identity. So the answer to both questions on the received view will be necessarily no. And this, I think, is the wrong verdict. So first of all, my strong intuition is that woman and Z woman are in fact the same kind. Because if the zombie twin Earthlings were to be brought to Earth, it would be absurd to say that we have 2 different kinds coexisting side by side. After all, the 2 kinds are identical in every respect, except for Z women's inability to have mental states. And this brings us to the second and more important worry. If woman and Z woman are indeed different kinds, the received view seems to give us the right answer for the wrong reasons. Because surely the metaphysics of mind can't be the reason why the 2 kinds are distinct, because the metaphysics of mind just has nothing to do with gender. It's irrelevant to gender. But it is precisely the consciousness or the lack of consciousness in the case of Z women that makes the difference between the membership conditions of the 2 kinds, woman and Z woman. So this is wrong. I think that the right thing to say is this: if the 2 kinds are distinct, then there's some deeper reason why they're distinct, and that same reason also explains the difference in their membership criteria, but it's not the membership criteria themselves that are responsible for the non-identity of the 2 kinds. And as far as our women go, it likewise seems to me that it's at least possible that woman as we have it just is the historical descendant of our woman. And whether we're looking at a case of survival through time of the same kind or not is something that it seems to me should be decided after further substantive investigation, both empirical and philosophical. And the received view just doesn't leave this possibility open because it tells us that necessarily our woman and women are not the same kind. The second advantage, so if the membership conditions of gender kinds are contingent, then that allows for quite a lot of flexibility. For example, it allows for gender kinds to change their membership conditions through time. It allows for membership conditions to vary from context to context, from culture to culture. And I think this is a non-negligible advantage because, for instance, it's widely accepted that self-identification is a membership condition for the kind woman. But as other philosophers have pointed out before, virtually no woman relates to womanhood in exactly the same way as other women. And especially given things like intersectionality, what self-identification means for each woman might be so widely different that the danger might be that the apparently unified notion of self-identification might just be empty. But if we allow that it's entirely contingent, what makes one a woman, then the possibilities for gaining membership in the kind woman by relating to it in different ways become virtually limitless. And there's no need to attempt to shoehorn them all into a single, neat, unified concept. Another important thing is that in the past, we have many times been very, very wrong about what it takes to be a woman. And so for the sake of epistemic modesty, we should refrain from actually building membership conditions into our account of gender kinds. Okay, the third advantage. The third reason why we should go against the received view is that membership conditions themselves are in need of explanation. Now, I'm taking for granted two things. So first, self-identification is a membership condition for the kind woman. I know I just said the concept is messy, but for the purposes of this discussion, it should do. The second thing I'm taking for granted is that woman does not have necessary and sufficient membership conditions. So there are other ways in which one might count as a woman. So for example, by occupying a certain social position. And at this point, if we make these assumptions, two questions, or at least two questions now arise. So first, why is it that self-identification is a legitimate membership condition for gender kinds? Because there are many, many other kinds that you cannot become a member of by identifying into them, however sincerely. So why is it that gender kinds have this special feature? And second, how come woman has disjunctive membership conditions? And more specifically, what makes these membership conditions of the same kind as opposed to membership conditions of a gerrymandered collection? So we need an explanation, an answer to these questions. So let's call E whatever feature of woman provides the explanation. So naturally, E is going to be in the essence of woman, but E cannot be or contain the membership conditions of woman itself because explanation is an asymmetric relation. So the membership conditions cannot explain themselves. So it follows that the membership conditions are not in the essence of woman. I also think that E will not explain why woman has these membership conditions by itself, but in conjunction with a set of empirical facts, which might lend further support to the claim that membership conditions are contingent. Now, just a note, of course, it's always open to friends of the received view to say that the membership conditions of women are just brute facts. And of course, I agree that why questions have to stop somewhere, but I think that if we can come up with a view that can answer the two why questions on the previous slide, rather than leaving them as brute facts, then we should go for that view because it's more explanatory. Okay, and finally, the fourth advantage. So we've all probably witnessed debates about precisely the membership conditions of gender kinds, such as women. A case of this that easily comes to mind is the disagreement between trans-inclusive and trans-exclusionary speakers on whether trans women are women. Now, it is very frequently the case that trans-exclusionary speakers are so confused about the nature of gender that they just end up speaking past those of us who have a better understanding of it. But I think this is not always the case. I think that in many of these debates about who counts as a woman and why, there is actually genuine disagreement. The problem with the received view is that it predicts that there cannot be such disagreement because if the membership conditions of the kind woman are essential to it, then two competent speakers cannot hold that the same thing has different membership conditions. They have to be talking about different things. And I think this is not right, and that my account can explain why there can be genuine disagreement. If it's not essential to women, who belongs to it and why? Then speakers can be competent with gender terms and they can correctly identify the kind that they're talking about by knowing what is essential to it, but they can still be wrong about its non-essential features, and that includes its membership conditions, which would explain this agreement. Okay, so we've reached the end of the talk. Thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to see as many of you as possible in the Q&A. Thank you.